Welcome back to What to Watch For, a fantasy basketball pregame show presented by hoopball.com. I'm your host, Alan Strokey, and today I'm really excited. We're joined by a very special guest to co-host with me. He is the Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, Jovan Buha. How are you doing, man? And welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Alan. I'm doing well. I've learned a lot about Achilles tendons and the calf region over the past 4 or 5 days. I feel like I'm in med school, but otherwise I've been good.
Yeah, no, you've definitely had to sort of shift gears over the last week. When you agreed to come on the show for the first time, it was a different world for the Lakers entirely. But this whole last week has been sort of a whirlwind in trying to figure out where we go next with that team. And I mean, yeah, it's just we're obviously going to talk a lot about them tonight. Jovan is also a fantasy basketball enthusiast, and luckily we are happy to have him and his perspective on some of the games that we've got going tonight. Just general, how the show works. We take a look at all of our teams that we have on the docket, which is 3 tonight. We have the Raptors and Bucks, Heat and Kings, and of course the Nets and the Lakers, the last of which we will talk about in a little more detail towards the end and get some of Jovan's perspectives on, this roster where we're at with them at the moment. So before we dive right in, if this is your first time watching or you've returned and just like checking these shows out, drop a like on the video below and please subscribe. And you can follow both Jovan and I on Twitter at our Twitter handles. I'm down there below. And yours is just your name, right, Jovan?
Correct. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, follow us on Twitter. And without further ado, we're just going to dive right in to the first game on the night. We have the Raptors visiting the Bucks, the first TNT game on the slate. We just minutes ago found out that Kyle Lowry has been ruled out with a thumb and ankle issue, a couple different things there. And I believe Yuta Watanabe is currently questionable with an ankle issue as well. So with Kyle Lowry out, that sort of simplifies exactly what we're going to be watching for here, because what we've seen with the Raptors so far this season from fantasy is that when the 4 main guys are playing, Norman Powell is sort of relegated to a reserve / fifth fiddle role in the rotation. And he's been fantastic over the last month or so because the Raptors have been down a body for just at different spurts at different times. OG Anunoby just came back from a 10-game absence in his last game, and Lowry got hurt in that one, and now he's going to be missing this one. So, Powell's going to get his minutes. He's going to start, and he'll probably take on a larger role in the offense. And we'll be watching Chris Boucher as well, who continues to be on and off. Brook Lopez, while a large body, is not a physical presence in the post these days. So we'll probably expect Boucher to do some of the similar things that he did in their last matchup, where the Raptors got the win over the Bucks. What are you looking at on the Toronto side, Jovan? Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you're more focused on?
No, I have Norman Powell in one of my teams, so I'm excited for tonight.
Yeah, he's been great.
He's been one of my favorite pickups of the season, especially recently. So I think you covered it on the Raptors side.
Yeah, so we'll just move along to the Bucks side of things, who, as far as the injury report's concerned, they are still just without Drew Holiday, who is in health and safety protocols with the league.
Yeah, the guy I've looked at with Milwaukee when Drew's been out is Bryn Forbes. Over those 5 games, he's averaging 12.4 points, almost 3 threes a game at 45%. So I think he's a nice streaming option tonight if he's somehow still on your waiver wire. You need points, threes, decent percentages. I think he's a guy I'd target. And then Bobby Portis, who I've seen in my leagues, kind of continues to. Guys pick him up, guys drop him. He's constantly on the waiver wire as another guy who stepped up, averaging 14 points a game. So depending on what you need, I think those 2 guys have benefited the most, aside from the mainstays, Giannis and Chris Middleton and those guys.
Yeah, Forbes has definitely gotten the largest minutes bump. And interestingly, since Drew has been out, I mean, the Bucks have been sort of skidding without him. He's missed about 4 or 5 games here. I know that the Bucks are on a 4-game losing streak at the moment. And Giannis has actually been the number 1 player in 9 category leagues during that stretch. He just seems to be doing a lot more in the facilitating game too. The free throw percentage is still kind of shaky, but it's definitely been better over this stretch of games. And like you mentioned, the big surprise of their season has been Bobby Portis, who just continues to truck along. He's been a top 100 player on the season, and I don't think that's going anywhere at this point. I think we sort of are locked in with that. But yeah, Bucks are pretty standard. We'll be looking for them to bounce back against the Raptors tonight. And so, aside from that, though, those are the big fantasy notes to take in there. So we'll move on to the second game. The non-TNT game tonight is the Miami Heat visiting the Sacramento Kings. Miami side, Goran Dragic, I believe, is still a game time decision. I don't know if that came out recently on the injury report. I haven't seen it yet, but if he's out, then Kendrick Nunn will continue to start. And really, the Heat are kind of they're in trouble. They're 11-17 on the season, and they have not, they've been streaking. They had a nice winning streak over the last heading into February, but they've lost about 4 games in a row here. On the fantasy side, I'm mostly curious about Kelly Olynyk, who over the last couple of games has seen his minutes drop from 14 in one game, 23 in the next. With the losing streak going on right now, it's possible that Eric Spoelstra is looking to get other guys involved in the rotation. We've seen Precious Achiuwa play a little more off the bench in favor of Olynyk, some more minutes too for. Really, he's just been relying heavily on a 5-man lineup of Kendrick Nunn, Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, Duncan Robinson, and Bam Adebayo. And I only say all of this because Spo has been very fickle with his front court rotation, especially when it comes to Kelly Olynyk. And he is, he's had a great stretch so far this season, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities that he could be dropped out of the rotation. So I'm watching to see his minutes count tonight. It's the second night of a back-to-back for Miami after losing to Golden State last night. And, Sacramento will be playing with some size tonight, which I know you'll touch on in a sec, Jovan. So his presence will be needed for at least in that respect alone. But if he's dipping below 23 minutes, it's going to be tough to rely on him to continue producing the value that we've seen out of him so far.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, Miami is one of those teams that it can be hard to project the rotation night to night. And that's just kind of been a thing for multiple years with Spo. So I never feel great about picking up, because I had it earlier in the season where I actually, I think I dropped Dragic for Nunn with that stretch when Nunn had started playing really well. And then he had a dud of a game. And I just feel like it's hard to project the Miami guys who's going to be playing, who's going to be getting the shots that night. And so I think that's one of my, not stay away from teams, but I just never feel confident about a Miami Heat player off the waiver wire.
Same here. And I was totally apprehensive when I grabbed Olynyk in a couple of spots. I knew that this was a possibility, and it was nice for a month, but I don't know, these last couple of games, it's eerily familiar. But Kendrick Nunn's also like that other guy who's been really great, especially with Dragic out. He's definitely had a nice second season, continues to be a nice scoring punch guard. Well, not off the bench. He's with the starting unit a lot of the time now. But yeah, so we're just kind of and especially with them losing, it's possible that that's going to spur another rotation change. So keep your eye on those minutes tonight. Anyway, we'll go to the Kings side, where you'll touch on, Jovan. We have Richaun Holmes out with a knee injury and Harrison Barnes also out with a foot injury.
Yeah, so I'm big on Hassan Whiteside tonight, and it's hard not to be after his last game. He played a season high 24 minutes, had 26 points, 16 rebounds, and 5 blocks. And this is just vintage Hassan Whiteside. Like from an actual basketball perspective, there are some drawbacks to him. A lot of these numbers end up being empty calories. But from a fantasy perspective, you love that. And he's just one of those guys where similar to like an Enes Kanter. If you know Enes Kanter is getting 25 to 30 minutes, he's going to put up a double-double. Hassan Whiteside is that plus even more. So I'm big on Hassan, and he didn't even start. Marvin Bagley got the start in that game, but playing 24 minutes, 12 of 15 shooting. So that alone can swing your field goal percentage. Again, 5 blocks, 16 rebounds. So I look at Hassan Whiteside. I do look at Marvin Bagley as I know he's going to be rostered in a majority of leagues, but if he's somehow on your waiver wire, someone that last couple of games averaging 18 points, 6.5 rebounds, he's looking emboldened without Richaun Holmes there. So I think those two guys in particular are the two I'm looking to benefit the most without Holmes.
Yeah, and it's easier to project for what will happen without Holmes, just because the center, with a center rotation is just a little easier to take a hold of. When it comes to Harrison Barnes, I feel like it's going to be sort of a committee approach there, where you'll see some Glenn Robinson the third, some Bjelica. He's he's been out of the rotation a lot in trade rumors, ironically, with the Heat. Maybe they'll showcase him a little bit more tonight. It's possible he'll get some minutes there. And Daquan Jeffries has also recently sort of emerged as a defensive specialist in the rotation. But like you said, Hassan Whiteside's the guy. He's the most reliable streamer if you're looking to plug someone in tonight. I don't know if any of those Barnes replacements are going to be all that relevant, just because there's a few of them. It could go any one different way. But yeah, Whiteside, as long as he's getting those 24 minutes, he's just going to go nuts with the boards and the blocks, especially. Yeah. So that's really it for those two games. The game of the night, though, in many respects, is the Brooklyn Nets visiting the Los Angeles Lakers. This game is a little more, a lot of hype coming into it, obviously, a potential finals preview. Although we're not going to have Kevin Durant, who's out with a hamstring injury, unfortunately, and obviously Anthony Davis is out with his hamstring / calf issue that he's been nursing over the last couple of games and will be for the next few weeks going forward. As far as the Nets are concerned, Kyrie Irving has been ruled in. He missed his last game in Phoenix with a back issue, and Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot has also been ruled in with a knee, who will pick up some extra minutes at small forward without Durant. And as far as what we're looking for on their side from fantasy, it's just, more usage for Joe Harris. He's going to get the bump, and as will Jeff Green as a floor spacer. It's going to be an interesting. It's an interesting matchup for both of those guys. If one of the two get going, it'll create some interesting defensive situations for the Lakers. And aside from that, you'll have Landry Shamet, Bruce Brown, and Cabarrot pick up some slack. But none of them are really on the fantasy radar to me. It's mostly just Joe Harris and Jeff Green. What about you? Do you see anything on the Brooklyn side that I missed?
I look at DeAndre Jordan as, without AD, I think the Lakers are a little vulnerable on the interior. So I could see a big game from DJ, maybe something like a double-double and a couple blocks, depending on how many minutes he plays. So I would look at that. I guess it depends on, I know in a couple of my leagues, he's still on the waiver wire. So I guess it just depends on your league, but that would be it. I'm with you. I think it's Harris and Green. I think Green could have a big game. I think that I think just this is a matchup that I think he's going to do well.
And it's interesting. Yeah, the Jordan angle is an interesting one too, because there is, that is, I guess that's one of the things that we'll have to touch on when we go on the Lakers side of things, is just how teams are going to be best prepared to sort of attack down low with the options that Los Angeles has now without Davis and mostly Marc Gasol and Harrell, which they've been splitting the center minutes anyway. But, it could be a big game for him too. I'd say between he and Green, those two have, depending on how the Nets want to go about it, there is different avenues for them to attack the Lakers here. So why don't you take the LA side of things? What anything from real quick on a fantasy perspective that we're going to be watching here?
Yeah, I look at three guys, and I think I would just be investing in all three because we don't fully know how the rotation is going to shake out yet. But I'm looking at Marc Gasol, Montrezl Harrell, and Kyle Kuzma. I think all, I guess maybe Trez is the one guy that's probably going to be rostered. But I think with Mark, I was really surprised that he ended up playing 30 minutes against the Timberwolves. I do think part of that, based off of Frank Vogel's post-game comments, was a rhythm thing, where Mark just hasn't had that many high-minute games. His prior best game of the season was against the Timberwolves, so I think he found a groove against them. They're one of the worst defenses in the league. So I think Frank kind of rode the hot hand there, and it was like, okay, Mark's playing aggressive. He's making threes. He's playing good defense. So I don't know. I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think he's going to be averaging 30 minutes a night, but I do think you could see an uptick. He's around 20 per game in the season. I think you could maybe see an uptick into that like 23, 24 range. And then with Trez, he only played 18 minutes and he still had 17 and 6. And I think a block. So Trez doesn't need, similar to a guy like a Whiteside. He's not going to put up the same rebounding or shot blocking numbers, but Trez doesn't need a lot of minutes to be very effective, very efficient. And then Kuzma is the de facto starter now. So, I was surprised at how small his role was in the Timberwolves game, because looking at the games Anthony Davis missed, he was averaging about 15 points a game. He was not as involved in the offense. But I do think Kyle Kuzma, as a guy who he's been rebounding really, really well lately. That's been a big development for him over the past few weeks. So looking at a guy who can get you, 12 to 14 points, 6 to 8 rebounds, maybe a block or a steal, a couple threes, decent percentages. Like he's a streaming guy for me. So I would look at those three if any of them are on your waiver wire, and maybe if you have a bench spot to kind of stash them, put them on your bench, see how they perform over the next few games, because there's a chance that Anthony Davis is out, beyond the All-Star break. And if that's the case, one of these three guys could be pretty valuable, I think, long-term.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you touched on, the center rotation is very interesting, particularly how I know we were all looking at Trez to sort of step up into more of a usage role, but it felt I guess one of the questions was going to be whether you felt that there was going to be any sort of you think Frank Vogel is going to mix up the front court rotation at all, where we've seen a ton of consistency with Marc Gasol and Trez splitting the majority of the center minutes, and Kyle Kuzma and Marquis Morris have been backing up AD for the most part. The one area that I was curious about is, do you see that they might go small for other stretches? I know when I'm looking at LeBron James's most played lineups this year, for the most part, he's always playing with two bigs. And I'm curious if you could foresee any situation where they might try and roll with him with one of the bigs and then play guys like Schroeder and Caruso and KCP together out there.
Yeah, so they've actually been closing with that lineup that you mentioned of AD, LeBron, KCP, Dennis, and Alex more recently. It's been kind of a thing over the past couple of weeks before AD went down. So that was kind of my prediction for the closing group, with probably Trez in the AD spot now. So they did close with Marc. Again, I think that was just more of a matchup thing. He was in a good rhythm, and Frank wanted to give him a chance to kind of get his confidence back a little bit. But I do think moving forward, most of the time it will probably be Trez or Keefe at the 5. I do think, you're going to see matchups where Marc just can't, they're playing the Nets and they're going with Jeff Green at the 5. Like Marc can't be out there defending Jeff Green. Right. So I think with most teams or a lot of the league playing 5-out basketball, especially late in games, you can't really play Marc. And that's where, I see a Trez or a Marquis as a guy that might close. So I do think Frank has been leaning more into that group. If you look at the minutes distribution of that lineup, especially the LeBron, KCP, Dennis, Alex quartet, that has been more recently in the past couple of weeks. So I think in a game like tonight, if it ends up being a close game, I could see, Alex is on James Harden, Dennis is on Kyrie Irving, KCP is chasing Joe Harris around screens, and it's LeBron and then Trez or Keefe at the 5.
That's interesting. And I think from what I can tell that those smaller lineups have been very potent when they're out there together on for stretches. And I'm curious too on Dennis. He is someone who stepped into a larger usage role in the Timberwolves game. I believe he was second in shots on the team. Do you think that that's going to be pretty consistent going forward too?
Yeah, it was interesting. I wrote about this earlier in the week, but if you look at everyone's numbers when AD is out, there isn't necessarily one major beneficiary. It is kind of a trickle down effect of across the rotation. It's almost like everybody plays 3 to 5 minutes. Everybody gets 2 to 3 more shots. Everybody scores 2 to 3 more points. It really is like a pretty even distribution, which I thought was interesting. But Dennis is the guy. And I think based off the Timberwolves game, it was as high as usage rate of the season, and by a decent amount, almost 10%, which I thought was really interesting. And he only took he shot 15 shots and only took 1 3. So he was going downhill the entire time and going to the rim, pulling up from mid-range. Had some nice 2-man action with Marc Gasol. So I do look at Dennis as a guy who's probably going to benefit arguably the most offensively overall, really becoming the Lakers' second option. And I think part of playing LeBron, the heavier minutes that he has been playing over the past few weeks, one way to kind of negate that workload is to have the ball more in Dennis's hands. And you've seen the Lakers, when those two are playing together, kind of give Dennis the ball a little bit more, play LeBron a little bit off the ball, have him attack on the weak side, have him attack as a spot up shooter. So I do think Dennis, now, if you're looking for assists, it's very up and down with him. Against the Timberwolves, he had 3 assists and 5 turnovers. So I think you get some good and bad with Dennis, where when he's being super aggressive, he can force some passes. He'll look for lanes that just aren't there, and maybe dribble the ball out of bounds or stuff like that. But for the most part, I think that version of Dennis is what the Lakers really need. And I think from a fantasy perspective, he's someone who certainly should be rostered, and I think is going to have a nice little stretch here. Yeah, no, it seems that was definitely apparent when in that Timberwolves game, that not only was just more being drawn up for him, but he was very aggressive out there. And he was definitely. It's definitely based off of his career. It sounds like the type of situation that he would love to step into. Watched him for years in Atlanta. He was all this. This is what he's been waiting for, is this moment to be a number 2 next to LeBron James, and the confidence won't be an issue there. No, not at all. No. So I'm glad that we touched on that. I want to circle back to Kuzma real quick, who like you mentioned, he never really found a rhythm in the Timberwolves game. But you do expect him to continue to start for the most part going forward. I was curious, do you think that Marquis Morris has any way to perhaps? I know that in a couple of games so far this season that Anthony Davis sat out. Marquis started 2 of them, I believe. Is there sort of a competition for that starting role still in place, or do you feel that Kuzma is pretty cemented into the role? I think there's a competition. But Kuzma has the big advantage. I mean, he started 4 of the 6 games that AD has missed. And right. At the beginning of the season, Frank Vogel said that whenever LeBron or AD misses a game, Kyle Kuzma is their replacement. And I think, obviously he's a guy who, started his career off as a scorer and kind of had some buzz in LA. And I think is one of those guys that, is more of a star off the court than his play is maybe warranted. So I think, similar to like a Dennis, he's a guy who's very self-confident. And I think as part of getting him to buy into his role, there is an element of like, okay, when one of these 2 guys is out, you are going to start. And, that the stretches that Marquis started, the team really was in a rut. And I think Frank was just trying to, test stuff out. And Kuz was playing really well off the bench. So I also don't think he wanted to interrupt his flow off the bench and with some of those second unit lineups. But I do think in a macro perspective, Kuzma is a guy who, I think wants to start. He's a guy who wants to get his shots. I mean, he is very confident. So I think in getting him to buy into a smaller role and not being as much of a scorer and not taking as many shots, I think the trade-off is when you have an opportunity like this with AD out to get him more involved, to play him more, to start him, I think the Lakers are going to do that just to kind of keep him happy. So I think if for whatever reason that they go on like a losing streak or they're in a bit of a rut, which they've had some uninspired play lately, I could maybe see Keith getting the starting nod if Kuz isn't playing well. But I think he's going to have every opportunity to continue to start because I know it's important to him. And I think it's important for the Lakers to kind of just keep everybody happy. Interesting. Yeah, no, it's definitely, it behoove everyone to have like, a level of confidence just, in both themselves and that the team still has in them. And I know Marquis has been like a great addition for the Lakers off the bench ever since he came last year off of the buyout market. And, Kuzma's kind of been a part of their future plans for forever now. So it's nice to kind of see him get another opportunity with that starting unit. And I know a lot of people who picked him up are going to be paying close attention to see how that minutes battle goes going forward. If, for whatever reason they do run into a rut, and then Keith would probably step into a larger role there. I had a couple more questions I wanted to touch on, and it looks like Adam King in the chat, he's as curious as I am on this next one. It's about Taylon Horton-Tucker, who was a preseason darling for not only just national folks, Lakers fans, but people in the fantasy community as well. He is a stat stuffer when he's getting minutes, defensive stats. We've seen him get involved as a passer. He's got a good 3-point shot. Do you foresee any avenues for him to get more involved in the rotation during the stretch without AD? This one's tough because it's his minutes have just been so inconsistent this season, and there's nights where he's played 6 minutes or less in 2 of his last 3 games, and but before that had passed Wes Matthews in the rotation and was really kind of in that like 9th man role with Keefe and Wes out of the rotation, and then all of a sudden now he's kind of back to being the 10th, 11th guy, depending on the night. So I think this is just going to be a bit of a roller coaster ride. There are going to be nights where he has those big nights, and we've seen him get 12, 15 points off the bench, a few assists, as you mentioned. He's capable of multiple steals and blocks. He because of his length and his anticipation, and he can stuff the stat sheet. So I think it's hard to predict when those nights are going to be, and unless some of those nights have just been the Lakers have 2 guys out and they're only rolling with 9 guys. So Taylon is going to get 15 minutes, and when he's going to get 15 minutes, he's probably worth taking a gamble on. But it's hard to predict that when they have 10 or 11 guys. So I think long term, I'm high on him. As Jared Dudley told me that he expects him to be starting next season. Like he thinks he's just that good that he doesn't see how the Lakers don't find a starting role for him next year. I don't know, if he's gonna. I don't know if that's gonna happen, but I do think that if he does start or play a 6-man, 7th-man role, he's for sure a fantasy player and someone that can I'm looking at at some point 12 to 14 points, 4 to 5 rebounds, 4 to 5 assists, a steal and a half, maybe 0.7 blocks, and good field goal percentage. That's the type of guy he could be, which I think, obviously has value deeper in the draft. So I'm high on him. I really like him, but I think it has been very difficult to predict what is a Taylon night and what isn't. So for that reason, I don't feel confident, starting him, right? If you want to stash him again, maybe he gets into a good rhythm and breaks out and has a bigger role. But I thought that he was going to play more against the Timberwolves, and he didn't. So that gave me some pause, I think, on the whole situation.
That's really interesting comments from Jared Dudley too. I mean, that they feel that strongly about, or he does at least. Definitely something, I guess, for dynasty owners or players to take note of for down the road. But from what I could tell too, it's just that he seems to be just it's inconsistent when it comes, and it would probably be more of a situation where maybe late in the year where the Lakers are resting more guys, maybe he gets other opportunities then. But it's been tough to rely on him in sort of a streaming capacity. Well, I really appreciate the time that you've given. I have one more question I wanted to touch on, and it's kind of tricky, so and I'm not sure if there's an answer to it yet, but it's about sort of the macro here with Anthony Davis. After he eventually makes it back from the injury, do you foresee the Lakers taking a cautious approach with him for the rest of the season? Because the big aspect of this injury is that he re-aggravated it, where it was something that the team had addressed and the medical staff had cleared him. And these hamstring issues can be pretty tricky. And we've seen it happen. Things can get worse if they're not all the way there. So minutes restrictions or maybe sitting out back-to-backs, do you think the Lakers would be more inclined to take that approach with him?
It's really tough to say right now because we still have limited information on the severity of the injury. We know he didn't rupture anything, so obviously that he's returning this season at some point. But there's 2 different things there. Where the sore right calf, that is something that's a multi-week injury. If he just had that, it would probably be he's returning after the All-Star break and is probably fine unless he somehow re-aggravates it again. But those injuries you usually are fine with, and you need a few weeks off, you're fine. The tendinosis in the Achilles, that's where I think the concern comes in, because that is a little similar to what Kevin Durant was dealing with in Golden State, and that's the type of thing that it is chronic. And a different version of it was Kawhi Leonard having tendinosis in his quad and him having to load manage for 2 straight seasons, and now has kind of finally been able to reduce that, although he still missed some games. So it's on, we don't know if maybe part of that it has been some of the quad issues. So I think longer term, there might be a little bit of concern when you hear tendinosis, especially in an Achilles where it is the worst injury in basketball. Like that is the area you need to be the most protective. So well, I guess to kind of like answer it the best way I can, I wouldn't be surprised if he's out past the All-Star break. Another week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Like I could see this being a 4 to 6 week recovery and return. And then at that point, I guess it really is just how severe is it? And we can't answer that right now. But if it's not too severe, he might be fine and might just be able to maybe rest the game here or there, and it's not a big deal. If it's more severe, then it might be a load management type thing where he is out every other game, or if there's a back-to-back, he's always out, or he is on a minutes restriction. So I wish I had a better answer for you. We just don't have enough information on the severity of it yet. But when you hear tendinosis, that's a bit of a scary thing. And, so I guess for the AD owners out there, if you can find a trade that you're confident in, that you're not selling too low on him, I would definitely be open to that, because I do think there's a chance that he's out longer than we think. And when he's back, it is some form of load management, whether that's minutes or resting games.
And right. Like, it's just the uncertainty around it is why it's such an interesting question. And I appreciate you giving that insight, because I know you've been digging into a lot of the, potential scariness with the tendinosis aspect of the injury. And that has obviously created a ripple effect of concern amongst people playing on fantasy teams. That I've seen a lot of people asking about Anthony Davis trades. And it is, I guess, like you said, it remains to be seen. And that is a very valuable perspective to have on this. Jovan, I can't thank you enough for giving your time to hop on today and share your thoughts on the Lakers. It's a big game tonight, and I'm sure we're all going to be tuned in, and there's a lot of different moving parts at the moment. So again, I appreciate you. You can follow Jovan on Twitter at his name, JOVAN BUHA. And hey, if you tuned in for the first time, we really appreciate you. We do these shows 5 days a week. We try and do reaction shows to other fantasy items as well. So please like the video and subscribe if you can. And we will see you all tomorrow. Enjoy the games tonight, everyone. And we'll see you soon.